Hello there again. I'm Chuck Todd, and welcome to a brand new season of Meet the Press Reports. Each week, we do a deep dive into a single topic on this show. And this week, we're going to look at the Republican efforts to restrict drag performances. Over the past 4 decades, America has seen a rapid cultural shift, and there's been a growing acceptance of LGBTQ rights. But with this social change has come some backlash. And in the past few years, many on the right have used GOP-controlled state legislatures to target the LGBT community with a new wave of laws. This is beyond marriage laws, which of course are now granted. The ACLU has identified over 470 bills this year alone that it identifies as anti-LGBTQ. A particular focus has been targeting the trans community. And the new front line of this battle is in Tennessee, which in March took it a step further because it became the first state to restrict drag performances. So joining me now is Antonia Hilton. She's been covering this story for weeks for NBC News and has traveled to Tennessee to get a first-hand look.
Thank you, Chuck. The new law in Tennessee is the first of its kind, but it could be the first of many. We spent weeks there talking to people on every side of this issue, from parents and politicians fighting to restrict drag to the drag performers who now worry about their art form and their personal safety. Every Wednesday afternoon, Story Van Ness arrives at South Press in Knoxville. At night, this coffee shop will turn into a karaoke bar and drag show. And Story is always its hostess. As a transgender woman raised in Tennessee, she spent years hiding who she was. It wasn't until she turned 18 and stepped out onto her first drag show stage that she realized it didn't have to be that way.
And I didn't have the words for it. It was one of the few times I felt powerful, I felt seen, I felt right in my skin. I can do anything I need to do when I'm in drag.
Wait, are all the children out of the building? Are there any children? Look around. If you're a child, raise your hand. Not emotionally, I mean like legally.
Over the past year, conservatives have launched a campaign against an art form with a centuries-old history among LGBTQ performers. Many Republican lawmakers and activists argue that drag performers are inherently inappropriate, sexual in nature, and pose a threat to children. A new law in Tennessee restricts performances in public. Repeat offenders could face a felony charge and up to 6 years in prison. The law is the first of its kind to pass, but may not be the only. There are similar bills being considered in at least 17 states. For Story and her friend who performs under the name Harry Scary, it's begun to feel like their very existence is a political act.
The agenda is to just exist and to feel valid.
The agenda is to be able to go to the bathroom without having to worry about being punched in the face.
And all we can do is say that it's bad and it's wrong and please don't do this to us. But they have found us to be a really effective political tool.
Since the tragic shooting at a Christian school in Nashville, the nation's eyes have been on Tennessee. Gun control took center stage the same week the drag law was set to take effect. Historic youth protests broke out at the state capitol. It's all your fault! Democratic lawmakers who took part were expelled and reinstated. And since the police initially identified the shooter as trans, the state has felt like a powder keg.
I was just sick over it. Then I found out about the identity of the shooter. My whole soul just sank. It's just going to be one more thing that they're going to use to try to exterminate us.
Over the last 12 to 18 months, we've seen videos surface of performances taking place either in public areas, public parks, or in venues where children are present. And some of these videos were shocking in terms of their sexually graphic nature.
State Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson, a Republican from Franklin, Tennessee, sponsored the new restrictive legislation. The law targets adult-oriented performances that are harmful to minors. It doesn't say exactly how performances will be determined to be harmful or sexual. Have you been to drag shows?
Have not. But I've seen videos. I've seen videos of drag. Well, and I guess I should say, have I been to places where a man was dressed as a woman and performing or singing, and maybe they were dressed, it was a Halloween party and they were dressed up as Dolly Parton? Of course I have.
Are you trying to send a signal?
Of course
that
not.
Some types of communities, some types of people aren't welcome here in Tennessee?
The only signal I'm trying to send is that you shouldn't be doing sexually graphic, you shouldn't be simulating sex acts in front of children.
Who's going to decide what's sexually explicit, what's inappropriate? I've looked through the language of the bill, and it's not clear at all who's going to make that determination.
Well, the same way any law is enforced, with our law enforcement, our district attorneys.
While some drag shows can be raunchy, those events are marketed to adults and typically held in nightclubs.
I'm proud that Tennessee's getting recognition for the fact that we don't think you should simulate sex acts in front of kids in a public park.
Still haven't gotten a name or a location or a venue where that happened.
We will be happy to send you videos, and if you haven't seen them.
The videos provided to NBC News do show children brought by parents to adult-themed shows. Only 1 out of 4 videos provided took place in Tennessee.
I've seen some of what has been shared, and some of it's taken out of context. Some of it is a bad choice made by a performer, but it's also, parents are in the room. You can decide, oh, that's not appropriate for my child, and leave.
You want to come out? You can.
Toni Stockton is a conservative Christian mother of 4, homeschooling her kids out on their farm near Nashville. Drag has made her an unlikely political activist. She heard that drag queens wanted to read stories to kids at her local library. She started a parent group and forced the library to cancel.
I grew up in Georgia, but raised by a single mama, raised in an apartment.
Yeah.
I didn't have any of this, so this is such a blessing.
Toni describes her childhood as chaotic. She says God and her family gave her stability, the kind she believes every child should have.
God designed us. He made us male and female. What's happening right now is we are living in the age of just mass confusion. You know, little boys, hey, put on Disney dresses, and little girls, it's just, there's so much confusion that it's the
Why protest their events? Why they don't come to your church?
Right,
so why
right.
go and tell them they can't go to a library?
Well, the live and let live is very dangerous. When you don't stand on biblical convictions, people will always go the way of culture.
There are children who are LGBTQ. Mm-hmm. Do you think they have a right to meet other adults, to go to events at libraries where they see people who reflect them?
Not if it's over-sexualized in nature.
When I brought up different styles of drag, Toni found them all sexual in nature.
Every single one that I've seen overly sexualized. What's happening with the trans movement that affects my life is wanting us to go along with something that defies our conscience as Christians.
Is it a movement, or is it people just trying to live their lives authentically?
You mean with the trans?
Yeah, you can call it a trans movement.
And I don't even know if that's the right word to call it. I just somewhere along the way, these people have gotten confused.
Let kids be kids. Let kids be kids. Let kids be kids.
This has become a centerpiece of the latest culture war. Recent reporting by the LGBTQ advocacy group GLAAD found 166 incidents of anti-LGBTQ protests, attacks, and threats targeting drag events since early 2022.
Stop grooming children! You are anti-Constitution yourself!
Extremist groups have protested from Nevada to New York, and in one case, firebombed a drag performance in Ohio.
Hello, everybody! Hi!
How do we bring people together?
Now the nationwide organization Drag Story Hour, which has hosted theatrical book readings at libraries since 2015, is rethinking how to move forward safely.
We're going to be creating the Royal Guard, which is going to be a volunteer-based safety marshal program.
The San Francisco chapter formed a new security plan to escort performers to and from events. They're planning de-escalation trainings and offering courses in CPR and gunshot wound response.
We're getting specific bomb threats of places, times, performers, dates. It's real. We really need a de-escalation plan and a protocol to keep people safe.
Why drag? Why not just read to kids in the library?
Why not drag? Everything is drag.
Have you tried to keep the attention of a child with something that is boring? You can't. They're gone.
What are you facing?
A lot of projection.
Panda Dulce, a trained social worker and educator, likes doing Drag Story Hour for one simple reason. When they were little, they wished they had more role models like them.
I love this book so much. It's about binaries. And so the whole premise of this is that it's a world of this or that, blue or yellow. You can only be blue or yellow. And then one day, there's a green animal who's basically ostracized for its color. It's important to understand that we're all complicated people and full of color and life.
Did you guys call the cops?
But when Proud Boys stormed Panda's reading, their joy evaporated.
Did it change you?
I am not the same person I was before. I had to digitally scrub my presence. I got gun trained. I never thought I would touch a gun in my life. I bought weapons. I enrolled in self-defense classes.
For months, they considered leaving drag behind.
Now, every time I go to a drag show, every time I'm walking out of a drag show, clenching my keys between my fingers, do they want me to be in fight flight for the rest of my life? Do they want me to think twice every time we are visibly different? And the answer is yes. And I think the question just becomes, are you going to let that happen?
The same question haunted Story the night of National Trans Day of Visibility. She almost canceled a gathering she organized in downtown Knoxville.
For me, being visible is more important than ever, but it's also absolutely terrifying. Finally, it shows our refusal to be denied our rights to life, to liberty, and to the pursuit of happiness, just like every other American.
A few hours after Story spoke, a Trump-appointed judge placed a temporary restraining order on Senator Jack Johnson's legislation just hours before it was set to go into effect, taking sides with performers who argued it violated their First Amendment rights. The next night in downtown Nashville, hundreds of Christians, including Tony Stockton, convened at the state capitol to pray for victims of the Covenant School tragedy, which the pastor leading the prayer, Sean Foyt, linked to the issue of gender identity as they live-streamed to the public.
I want to invite the Senate Majority Leader, Jack Johnson, over the state. I want to invite him up here. America saw, of course, the violent images of what happened at Covenant Christian School. And I think it's time for the people of God to rise up and say no more. And so can you extend your hand to this amazing legislator, his family? I just want to pray over him.
There's a harvest coming with those that battle with sexual identity issues. We thank you, Jesus, that you're going to bring salvation, that you're going to bring deliverance, and that you're going to bring healing. How many believe that?
Heavenly Father, I pray that America would find the Bible.
Pastor Ken Peters, a friend of Tony Stockton who lobbied for the drag law, says this battle isn't over.
Christians are under attack in our nation.
When you look at the number of kids dying from guns year after year right now, are you praying for the wrong kind of reform?
Well, how are you going to stop bad people from getting guns?
Why does regulation not work for guns, but it does work for drag shows?
Well, because you can stop drag shows. You can't stop criminals from getting guns.
For Story, there wasn't much time to celebrate the judge's temporary restraining order. It's set to expire at the end of May, and performers may soon have to go to trial to defend their work. For now, the show must go on. She still holds out hope that one day she may live to see a different Tennessee.
Every day consider moving to a bluer state, to moving to somewhere where that they have protections for people like me, somewhere where I don't have to fight insurance to get the health care that I need. Somewhere where I can walk down the street in relative safety. I'm terrified, but I can't leave because I know that I would never forgive myself.
And Antonia Hilton joins me now. You know, Antonia, Tennessee seems to be ground zero for a lot of the culture wars that we're all facing. I mean, you had it was a transgender individual who had who shot the gun at the mass shooting. We've had these lawmakers who were trying to speak out about guns kicked out. You get a sense that Tennessee's politics and its urban growth, Nashville and Memphis, is scaring some people. Is that what this all is about?
Certainly fear around change is a theme that came up time and time again when I would talk to people, whether it was a politician or it was, a mom like Tony Stockton. This feeling of, well, when I was a kid and the things I'm used to seeing, they're just not there anymore.
Is this about the Hollywoodization of Nashville? I almost want to wonder, because Nashville's growing like leaps and bounds. It is the music capital of the world.
It is.
Okay, not just the United States. And a new culture is coming in, and that's what I think. I wonder if this is happening. A new culture is coming in,
but some of the culture has been there a long time.
Right.
Many of these performers have been performing in Tennessee for decades. I've spoken to drag queens who've been performing in venues there, making a good living for 20 years in Tennessee. And they tell me they've never been as frightened as they are now. And so, this is an art form that's been around for hundreds of years.
Right.
And so part of the responsibility as a reporter, right, is to get down to the question with people of, well, what really did change? Of course, demographics have shifted. Nashville may look different, but the presence of transgender people, the presence of performers who dressed up a little quirky and different, that's been there for a long time. And I think what you ultimately find is that they come back and they pull back to this place of parental rights and protection of children. But you have to realize that it's a specific group of parents and it's a specific type of children.
And very quickly, just to double check here, this law was written vaguely enough that it should target places like Hooters or what people might refer to as, quote, gentlemen's clubs. But this bill doesn't target that, does it?
It doesn't. At least that's not the way that the lawmakers or the supporters of the bill have interpreted it themselves. They call it the drag law. Even though
in the wording itself,
drag does not show up.
In theory, gentlemen's clubs and a Hooters is probably now no longer legal in Tennessee.
But we don't hear those performers or those business owners changing their work or fearful for their lives at this moment.
All right, Antonia Hilton, terrific work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
When we come back, we're going to look at where this movement fits in with the historical fight for LGBTQ rights and how these movements emerge and gain traction in our culture. You won't be surprised to find out this current moment rhymes with history. Stay with us. Welcome back. We wanted to put the anti-drag movement into some historical perspective, and I'm being joined by two guests to help us do just that. Dr. Lila Roop is a professor of feminist studies and is the interim dean of the graduate division at the University of California, Santa Barbara, UCSB. She has studied and helped develop curriculum on sexuality and women's movements, and she's written books on drag queens and LGBTQ history. Also with us is James Jasper, who has taught sociology for decades, has written and edited over a dozen books on protests and social movements, including his most recent book, Gains and Losses, How Protesters Win and Lose. Lila, let me start with you. Everything old is new again. And this anti-drag movement feels very retro. It feels repetitive. It feels almost so repetitive, it's a bit silly. Yet here we are.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right that it is something that has a long history. But on the other hand, it also there have been moments in American history in particular where drag has been very popular and really quite accepted. So I think the growing visibility of drag, you don't have to go to a gay bar any longer to see a drag show. You can turn on the television. And I think that has made it both more acceptable in some circles, but also more threatening. And so I see this really as a question of backlash.
Yeah, I was just going to say, why target the drag community now? I look at it, if you'd have told me this was 1983 and not 2023, I'd have said, yeah, okay, this is the moment we're in culturally. This is why it seems so odd. It feels like we got past this.
No, I think that's exactly right. But what I think this really is totally connected to the fact that gay and lesbian population has become more acceptable. Attitudes are much more positive. The attitudes towards same-sex marriage changed more dramatically than anything else. And so it's almost as if the movements that have always targeted this kind of gender, these kinds of gender issues have found a new target, and it's really trans. And drag queens and trans are not the same, but they have the same resonance for the groups that are really opposing them. And I think that's really what's happening.
James, how would you compare this current protest movement on the right to, say, Anita Bryant and what she did with, quote, Save the Children, which was an anti-gay movement? It was when teachers were finally given protections in the public schools in Florida, and, it became this, she created this sort of boogie person movement regarding gay teachers.
Yeah, well, there are a couple resonances there. First, she, I think, helped pioneer a lot of the language of gay predators going after our children, right? The name of her organization was Save Our Children, not Stop the Queers. So a lot of this idea that these were people with an agenda who were grooming children, who that being gay or lesbian, that sexual orientation was a choice, and hence it could be a sin if you put it in Christian terms, and she was a fundamental evangelical Christian. So a lot of the language comes from there. It's not just that to make this work rhetorically, you need not just villains, but you need victims. And children always make the best victims. They're most sympathetic. We pretend that at least that they're innocent. They don't know anything about sex. So if you can link any kind of LGBT activity to children, well, then you have the potential for the homophobic rhetoric. The other thing that reminds me, though, of this case is, and you mentioned this before, you have very blue cities in very red states. Yeah. And so you have this tension. The Republican state legislatures have right within their own states people they can push around, people they can bully because they have trouble fighting back. So you see this in a lot of issues, not just on gender and queer issues.
James, let me follow up on how protest movements win or lose here. I want to put up some historical polling data on same-sex marriage. In 2004, the opposition to same-sex marriage was at 62%. By 2022, support for same-sex marriage was actually higher than that original opposition. It is at 65% the last time we tested it. It's an extraordinary shift in culture in 19 years, at least in the history of public opinion. Assess that protest movement. Why did it succeed so quickly?
Well, it is quite remarkable, and in my view, it was an issue that is kind of similar to the drag issue, which is, I think it's not a great choice of issue for the religious right. What happened with marriage, at first it seemed good, a good issue for them. They got some referenda passed against same-sex marriage. But as the controversy went on, you had story after story of these couples who had been together 20, 30, 40 years, these loving couples who had raised kids, who had grandkids, who had pets and wonderful families. And as all these stories came out, they turned out to be very sympathetic people. All they wanted to do was legalize the love that they had had for years. So there weren't villains. There weren't really victims because the kids that they had raised seemed like everybody's kids. There's no real difference, and there've been a lot of studies that have found, you're raised by same-sex parents or straight parents, there's really no difference. So I think that the drag issue will be kind of similar as time goes by, and we hear from more and more drag performers. Drag performers just want to make you laugh. They want to entertain you. They don't take themselves too seriously. They're pretty charming people. They are not predators. They're going to come off pretty sympathetically over time. So, hopefully, it will also be a very short time before this dies down as an issue.
And Lila, one of the other reasons I think that the same-sex marriage movement moved so quickly is there was more science proving that this is not a choice. Homosexuality is not a choice. You're born that way. As there more scientific research comes out about gender being on a spectrum, and more of that research, how important do you think that will be to the trans movement and to all of this?
Well, I do think it's very clear that attitudes about homosexuality, about being gay, and being trans are really affected by when people do believe that it is really something that you cannot change, that it is genetic, that it is in some way biological, and of course there is disagreement about that, but what I think is really important is that when people believe that it is not that it's something biological, they're much more likely to be supportive, and so I do think that there will be more change along those lines. Although it is clear that people's attitudes towards trans now they tend to believe that gender is formed at birth based on sex, but they also are more open to the idea that people should not be discriminated against because they're trans. So I think we'll see the same kind of development of a change in attitudes over time as people get to know people who are trans, because now they don't know, they're not very likely to have that experience.
At some
point, I think it will follow the same way that attitudes about gay people changed.
At some point, many Americans are libertarian at heart, and they do eventually get there. Lila Roop, James Jasper, really appreciate you coming on and lending your expertise to this topic. And that's all we have for this episode of Meet the Press Reports. Next week, we're going to look at the power of AI, the promises it offers, and the dangers it clearly poses. Thanks for being here. I'll see you here next week, and of course this Sunday on Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.